Okay, so picture this. There's a machine sitting in a lab in South Korea, and inside that machine is a swirling loop of gas that's been heated to 100 million degrees Celsius. That's not a typo. 100 million degrees. That's roughly 7 times hotter than the core of the actual sun. And here's the part that genuinely makes my brain itch. That blob of superheated matter never once touches the walls of the machine holding it. It just floats there, suspended in midair by magnets, glowing at temperature that would vaporize literally any solid matter we've ever made, and the Korean scientists held that going for 48 seconds. I know 48 seconds doesn't exactly sound like a flex, and you probably waited longer than that for this video to load, but by the end of this, I promise you'll understand why a bunch of physicists basically lost their mind over those 48 seconds, and why I think this is one of the most underrated science stories of the decade. If you're into the kind of stuff that does sound like science fiction but is somehow real and happening right now, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button before we dive in, because this channel lives for exactly this kind of thing, and I'd hate for you to miss the next one. Alright, let's get into it. So, what is this machine? The machine is called KSTAR, and it stands for Korea Superconducting Tokamak Advanced Research, which is a mouthful, to be honest, so most people just call it Korea's artificial sun. It lives at the Korean Institute of Fusion Energy in Daejeon, and the nickname isn't just marketing. The whole point of this thing is to recreate, here on Earth, the exact process that powers the sun and every star you've ever looked up at. That process is nuclear fusion, and it's the opposite of what you might be thinking. Nuclear fusion happens when two light atoms' nuclei merge to form a single heavier one, generating a huge release of energy. You take hydrogen, you smash it together hard enough, and it becomes helium, and in that merger a little bit of mass gets converted straight into energy. This is where the sun's light comes from. This is where the heat comes from. It's been running in this reaction for about 4.5 billion years, and it's barely getting started. Now here's the dream that's been chasing scientists for over 70 years. If we could pull that off down here in a controlled way, we'd have a power source that's almost too good to be true. The fuel basically comes from seawater. It doesn't spit out carbon, doesn't leave behind the long-lived nasty waste that regular nuclear fission plants do, and it can't melt down because the second anything goes wrong, the reaction just stops. No fuel, no reaction. Simple as that. So why don't we have fusion plants on every corner already? Well, because doing it is actually monstrously, almost absurdly hard. Now, here's the bit that always trips people, and it tripped me up the first time I've heard it. Fusion reactors require very high temperatures, many times hotter than the sun, because they have to operate at much lower pressures than where the fusion naturally takes place inside the cores of stars. Think of it like this. The sun cheats. It's got this colossal gravitational crush at its core, pressures roughly equal to 340 billion times the air pressure at sea level on Earth, and that insane pressure does a lot of the heavy lifting. It squeezes atoms so tightly together that they fuse at a relatively cool 15 million degrees Celsius. It's safe to assume that we can't really build pressure like that in a lab. There's no machine on Earth that crushes things 340 billion times, so we have to make up for the missing pressure with raw heat instead. That's the whole reason KSTAR has to hit 100 million degrees. It's not showing off, it's compensating for the fact that we can't squeeze the way a star can. So we have to cook the fuel way hotter than the star itself ever gets. Honestly, I find that detail kind of beautiful. We can't out-muscle gravity, so we out-heat it. And once you've got matter that hot, it stops being a gas. It becomes plasma, a chaotic soup of charged particles, and it desperately wants to fly apart in every possible direction. Controlling it is like trying to hold smoke in your hands while it's on fire. So, how do you contain something that would destroy any container? You don't use a container. You use magnetic fields. KSTAR is what's called a Tokamak, which is a donut-shaped machine that uses powerful magnets to trap gas and extreme heat in a state of matter called plasma. The plasma loops around the inside of the donut, and because it's made of charged particles, magnetic fields can grab hold of it and steer it, keeping it floating in the center away from the walls. And this is where Korea has a genuine edge over a lot of the competition. KSTAR's magnets are superconducting. KSTAR is a superconducting tokamak, which is why it's able to operate for longer stretches of time in comparison to, for example, the jet tokamak in the UK, which has magnets made of copper. The problem with copper magnets is brutally simple. Tokamaks with copper magnets are limited by the magnets heating up too much. They cook themselves and you have to stop. Superconducting magnets sidestep that whole bottleneck, which is exactly why duration, that all-important clock, is where KSTAR shines. Fun fact, and I think this deserves more love, when KSTAR first fired up back in 2008, it was the world's first tokamak using niobium tin superconducting magnets. So this machine has been a pioneer from day one. Alright, it's time for the main event. KSTAR managed to sustain plasma with temperatures of 100 million degrees for 48 seconds during tests between December 2023 and February 2024, beating the previous record of 30 seconds set in 2021. Now, let me put that jump in perspective because the numbers tell a story. KSTAR achieved its milestone of reaching 100 million degree plasma in 2018 for the first time. Then in 2021, it held that temperature for 30 seconds, and now it's 48. 48 seconds is the longest that a plasma has been held at a fusion-relevant temperature. Full stop. Nobody on the planet has kept matter that hot, that stable for that long. And there was a second record buried in the same campaign that didn't get nearly enough headlines. They also had the plasma in a super efficient, super stable state called H mode, or high confinement mode, for more than 100 seconds. That's the calm, well-behaved version of the plasma, the one you actually want from a power plant, and they kept it purring for over a minute and a half. This is the part where I just have to say, I love that they didn't get there with some flashy single trick. They got there with patient, unglamorous engineering, and the hero of the story is a part that most people never heard of. At the bottom of the tokamak sits a component called the diverter. The diverter is a vital component located at the bottom of the vacuum vessel that handles the exhaust, pulling out waste gas and impurities, and it has to endure the most substantial surface heat loads in the whole machine. Basically, it's the part that takes the worst beating. Originally, KSTAR used carbon for this, but once they started pushing for longer runs at 100 million degrees, the heat flux exceeded the limit of carbon diverters. Carbon just couldn't take it anymore, so they spent years, starting back in 2018, developing a new one out of tungsten, the metal with the highest melting point of any element. Tungsten has a very high melting point, but doesn't absorb the plasma fuel like a sponge or react with it the way the previous carbon-based diverters would. And here's what I respect about the team. They were honest that it might not work. There was a risk that tungsten could shatter or that the new setup would fail to generate plasma. One of the physicists, Hyun-seok Kim, straight up admitted that at the beginning of the campaign, the temperature of the inner wall of the tokamak did not rise well, and they had to scramble to adjust on the fly, re-wrangling the plasma with the magnetic fields until they tamed it. That's not a clean Hollywood breakthrough. That's a team troubleshooting a wildly difficult machine in real time and pulling it off anyway. I find that more impressive than if it had just worked on its first try. So, why should you care about 48 seconds of glowing gas? Because a real fusion power plant can't run in bursts. Future tokamak power plants would intend to operate in steady state, keeping the plasma stable and the fusion reaction going continuously. A reactor that switches on for 30 seconds and then has to catch its breath isn't a power plant, it's a science experiment. The entire game right now is stretching that duration out longer and longer until sustained basically means forever. Every second they add is a second closer to the real thing. And KSTAR isn't doing this in a vacuum, figuratively speaking. The data it generates feeds directly into the ITER, the gigantic international fusion project being built in France, which is a coalition of countries betting on to prove fusion can actually produce net energy at scale. The KFE president framed this record as a green light for acquiring core technologies required for the fusion demo reactor, which is the planned step after ITER, the one that's supposed to actually put fusion electricity onto a grid. The tungsten diverter they tested, tungsten is also the choice made in ITER, so Korea is essentially battle testing ITER's design choices years ahead of time, and they're not slowing down. The team has set a genuinely bold target. The ultimate aim is for KSTAR to be able to sustain plasma temperatures of 100 million degrees for 300 seconds by 2026, which is this year, a critical point to be able to scale up fusion operations. 300 seconds, full 5 minutes of an artificial sun floating on magnets hotter than anything else in the solar system. If they hit that, it's a massive deal. Now, here's my honest take to wrap this up. Fusion has been 30 years away for about 50 years now, and I get why people roll their eyes. It is dangerous after all, and we've had Chernobyl and Fukushima. But what's happening at KSTAR isn't hype. It's measurable, repeatable progress that's clearly accelerating, and it's not dangerous. 1 million degrees in 2018, 30 seconds in 2021, 48 seconds in 2024, and now they're going for 300. That's a curve heading in exactly the right direction, and it's been driven by careful, stubborn, brilliant engineering rather than wishful thinking. I walked away from this story genuinely more optimistic than I've been about clean energy in a long time, and I don't say that lightly. And if you found this even half as fascinating as I did, smash that like button because it genuinely helps more than you'd think, and subscribe so you're there when KSTAR makes its run at 300 seconds, because trust me, we'll be covering it. Thanks for hanging out with me, and I'll catch you in the next one.